Great. Welcome, everybody, to Senate Economic Development, Housing and General Affairs. It is Tuesday, tax day, April 15th. Everybody okay? Yeah. Good. Most important thing is our homestead tax should be filed today. So we are, for the first bit of our meeting, we're going to address our funding priorities, which the Senate Appropriations Committee is chomping at the bit for. We have 3 or 4 areas of priority: housing, economic development, labor, and pending. And what I mean by pending is the asks that we have that we have not actually formally included in bills or passed out of this committee. So sadly, Senate Appropriations is asking for our priorities before we have necessarily fully discussed them and or before we've chosen to include them in a bill. So some of that we've heard testimony on. I'm not asking us really to consider anything that we haven't taken testimony on, but there are some things that we haven't actually passed out of committee in a bill. So we have our own, the committee had asked to have this chart created by JFO. And so we have our own Patrick Dickinson here to explain the chart that he's created for us, which answers the questions the committee had as we began to sort by our priorities by what had been in the governor's original. Well, you explain it, Patrick, it's yours. Sorry.
Sure. So Patrick Pearson, the fiscal office, you got 2 sheets in front of you, and I believe they've been posted to the website.
Not quite yet.
Not quite yet. So
they're in the process.
We can either go along on paper together, or I can share my screen if you prefer.
I think the paper is fine for the moment, although my screen might help the people who are watching in YouTube land.
Well, why don't I get logged in?
I just sent you the link.
And we can do both. But while I'm pulling that up, the larger sheet you have is going to consist of basically everything that you have passed out of this committee so far. And that has been cross-referenced with things that are in the governor's recommend, what is included in the House budget, which is currently in SAC right now. The next column, agency ask, is, in that instance, everything that is in the GovRec is going to look the same in the agency ask. But of course, there are some things that are, not admin requests. So, for example, if you look at line, where is that? If you look at line, where is this? Oh, line 14, this Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund. That was that resource guide that was in your economic development bill. So that's an instance where I have the 100,000 there as an agency ask, but I don't know if for some of those non-executive branch agencies, I'm not sure if they are necessarily official. So if anyone, it's all to say, if anyone on this list is sort of misrepresented by what I put under agency ask, let us know and we can correct that.
I think we've grouped a lot of the asks under agency asks. So it's the ask of our economic development group, the small business team.
Yeah.
That was their ask.
But sort of looking at, sort of big time figures. So I'll look at the bottom in line 24, you can see that, in the GovRec, there was about 50 million, amongst these different programs. The House budget includes about 41 million of that. Agency ask, again, sort of a bit of a term of art here, was about 52 million. And then what's been passed out of this committee thus far is about 73 million. One note in line 3, the governor's recommend did have that 4 million for VHIP. I just want to note that the House moved that from base to one time. So that's the difference there. So if you were to include that in the top line figure, you'd be looking at the governor's recommend being about 54 million.
So a big piece of their ask actually was to move it to base. So one of the things we can advocate for if we feel like it, if we feel moved to, is to ask the Senate Appropriations to consider moving it back to base. I mean, they have supported the amount that have asked for, so. And actually, I believe it was in the governor. You just said that, it was in the governor.
It's at base.
Yeah.
But the House.
But that's why you
did it
changed,
for
right.
one time, and the construct that it was passed out of your committee in was as a one time as well.
Right.
And so, yeah, so I know part of the, exercise here is going to be to signal to the appropriations committee what your priorities are. I've heard of committees doing that in several different ways. Kind of maybe the funniest I've heard is highest, higher, and high. But
Well, that's my
I've
star
also
system.
heard of stars.
That was
I've
my
also heard
stars
of
with
1,
Richie.
2, or
I
3
had 3 stars,
Yeah.
2 stars, and 1 star, which is highest, high. Or most, yes, whatever. Okay, so should we just cruise down this? I think that you have everything. I looked at this last night and I'm pretty sure this is as we have discussed and passed.
Can I say something?
Yeah, sure.
Incredibly helpful. Thank you, Patrick. I don't know how long this took you, but what jumps out at me is now I have a better idea of how far we are from where the governor was as well as the House. And what's really blinking is line 10. I just want to better understand that 15 million, because the way I interpret this is we're about 23 million over what the governor's recommend is, which is also over what the House is. And that's a big difference. And so that's not all of the money that goes to VHCB, right? VHCB gets a bunch of other. Can you tell me how that 15 million compares to what else VHCB gets? And I guess I need a refresher on what that is.
So what was included in the governor's recommend was just the statutory allocation that they're entitled to, which comes from the PTT. So what you see for that, and I don't have that,
which I definitely know what it is.
property transfer.
Oh, right.
So
Yeah.
it goes, there's certain allocations. One, part of it goes to the Clean Water Fund, some of it goes to the HCB, and other agencies. So what was included in the GovRec, it has the statutory allocations. The GovRec basically just maintained those statutory allocations. What you see with the 5 million in the House and 15 million from what was passed out of here, that's over and above that. So it's just additional dollars for it had a little bit longer. I tried to abbreviate a little bit to keep the cell, but it had a longer description of what that money was before. But sort of the main thrust of it was for to enhance capacity for production of affordable rental housing for mixed income type development.
I'm not saying it's not worthy. What I'm saying is it's getting us well outside of the ballpark of where the others were. So I guess I need a refresher on why I think I voted for this, why this 15 million is so critical above and beyond what they're already getting.
Actually, it was the House that included money for VHCB. One of the issues was the House was doing that. I don't believe that's in our bill.
Oh, it's from the information I got from Ted.
Yeah, it's not in our bill.
all that.
It's not.
Okay.
So you can deduct 15 million from that 73. We were expecting, I believe it was almost 8 million or just over 8 million for VHCB in the budget adjustment, right, Polly?
Yeah, so
Polly, sorry, let's introduce yourself, Polly, and
for the record, Polly Major, Policy Director for VHCB.
Right.
And just to say that later this morning, Gus Seelig is going to come in and testify on what VHCB would do with additional dollars to develop affordable housing. The House in their housing bill included 25 million for the development of affordable housing. These are the dollars that are targeted to low and moderate income households when we develop housing in the state. So that's why you see a big number there. It's for that part of the housing continuum.
Right.
And the BAA included 8.6 million from the fund that the treasurer identified. And then that was did not come to fruition. In the House budget, they included 5 million one time for next year to continue housing development. Right. And that's in addition to the statutory share of the property transfer tax that comes to VHCB.
Right. And we're expecting that this year, Polly, to be what?
We're expecting about 20 million of that for housing.
Right. And just to put in perspective, and I know it was extraordinary, but in the last 4 years, we have appropriated or 5 years, we've appropriated over 600 million into housing. So this is huge step back, obviously, because we have to work within our means. But it is, as housing increases in cost with inflation and with the tariffs that we're looking at with lumber and steel, this is sadly a need that is just enormous. But the 15 million that Ted has included here is actually a question mark, because it's part of what we might or might not have been asking for this part of the session. This committee understand that we did not include this in our housing bill. So this is not.
Okay, I'll make a note of that, and I'll just point out with that change to the that line item that brings the committee's number down to about 58 of them.
Yeah, I was going to say,
So-
because we were not that.
May I make another comment?
You may. Sorry, it just that reminded me that we had not done.
So that helps a lot. Now I feel like we're more in the realm. And now I hope this is not pejorative, but I see big money items and I see small money items. And so the big money items, differences now that are catching my attention, that for me to make a statement of support or prioritization. This is a new committee for me, so I'm going to play the new guy card. All right. Is really lines 8 and 9, because now I'm seeing the House cut those by about 7.5 million. And we're saying to stick with the governor's recommend, but that 7.5 million would get us back down to approximately where they are. So I'm wanting to know why the House cut those, why the governor kept them in the recommend, and why we're proposing to keep them. I remember presentations on those, but now that we're at a place where we're trying to prioritize, I guess I would need more of a refresher than the 30 minutes we had in testimony on those two items.
And luckily, we have Chad Simmons here.
Yes, good morning, Chad Simmons from Vermont Housing Finance Agency. So the governor recommended $15 million for each of the two middle income housing programs, the rental revolving loan fund, which provides a subsidy to development of middle income housing, rental housing, up to 150% AMI, and then the middle income home ownership development program, which provides subsidies to both the development and to moderate income families, an affordability subsidy. So it could be both for that home ownership development and to develop moderate income housing.
Are they one time? Is this one time, and is this a new program, or does this already exist?
These
Both of
both
these-
exist.
Yes, both of these programs exist, and these dollars would restart those programs so that we could invest in those.
Restart their
Because they're one time.
stasis.
So, yes, so currently the middle income home ownership development program, the legislature allocated a total of $24 million over the last two prior fiscal years, not FY25. And those funds were expended. So they funded about 125 homes at a subsidy of $130,000 per unit. The rental revolving loan fund, the legislature allocated $10 million, and that will fund in last year's, in 2 years ago, FY24, and that will fund about 260 units of moderate income affordable rental properties. And so we are looking for funds to restart both of those programs.
In the House level, what would that do for you?
So the House passed budget allocated $10 million for the home ownership program and 7.5 for the rental program. We're okay with those amounts. I will note, Maura Collins, our executive director, was in Senate Appropriations 2 weeks ago. While she was there presenting for our programs, she did lead with that we need additional dollars for VHCB. Without those dollars, we're not able to take advantage of our 4% tax credits, as well as get us further down the road of meeting our housing targets of safety.
Right. So as is true with many of the housing funding pieces, what's at stake, Chad just talked about. What's at stake is their ability to match it, to leverage it, to use tax credits, both the federal tax credits that are so important to these complex financing structures. So I think that is the key piece for us, so why it's so important that we invest as much as we're able.
I
So,
will, if I could,
yeah, sure.
one final note that we are working with Senate Appropriations on is this committee, as well as the House General Committee, both passed out of your bills, the housing bills, the first generation home buyer program.
Yeah.
Those were removed in both appropriations committees and have yet to be put back in. We are asking the Senate Appropriations Committee to take $1 million from those two middle income programs I just mentioned and apply that to the first gen. So as the budget stands right now, we're asking the committees to put $16.5 million towards those middle income programs and $1 million towards first gen. And first gen was included in your.
It was included in our, and I don't know why it's not here, but it was included in our bill because Keisha reported that.
Yes, it was, and again, I'll be totally candid, I'm learning a little bit this year. So it was included
I
in the
know we're
tax.
learning every day.
Yes, I am learning. It was included as a tax credit this year,
Right.
not as a one-time appropriation. So we are adjusting and seeking a one-time appropriation this year. And that would be taken from this, the 17.5.
So in our bill, we included it as a tax credit, but not as a one-time appropriation. Okay. That cut date.
Well, how do we interpret the second?
Let's go to the second page because I think we're pretty clear on the first. At least I hope.
So I'll admit I don't know a lot about sort of the context that a lot of these programs have come to you as pending. But you know, the list that you have here is you know, basically the list of items that I was told were of interest and you know, just again, same sort of format, what's in the governor's rec, what the House passed, and you know, what I perceive to be what the agency asked was.
Right.
None of these items are things that this committee has acted on.
But all of which we have heard about. So the VSA that we heard from the chancellor of the state university, Vermont State University, on the Freedom and Unity grants, which are yeah.
Just for clarification, so this sum we put on top of the page one sum, come up to the total, and that's what we're really looking at is.
That's what we're looking at. And these are all, we don't have anything here that we haven't heard about yet. These are all programs. Oh, yeah, that's not true. We haven't yet fully heard from Molly about SASH, which we're hearing about this morning, and VHCB's ask, which are incorporated in the House budget. So as you know, going through H 479, we are teasing out the sections that are different from our housing bill. And several of those are incorporated here. One of them is SASH. One of them is the Associated General Contractors Training Program it's a training for the construction trades. We haven't yet fully heard about that. We've heard about the VSU ask on the HVAC apprenticeship. We've heard about Freedom and Unity. And we've heard from Advanced Vermont, Vermont Serve, Learn, and Earn, we've heard from, and First Degree Promise, we've heard from, which is the McClure Foundation. And the military retirement, we have not yet heard from. We have scheduled testimony next week.
This is great. I don't see MTAP we heard about. Is that?
Yes, that's missing.
So that's what.
And I don't know why that's missing.
Like
Why is that?
municipal technical assistance
Yeah,
program.
critically important one. Is that on that is missing. It's the, I think some people refer to it as the Municipal Technical Assistance Grants, but I believe its formal title was Small Business Technical Assistance. Is that right, Patrick?
Sounds good. I'm not, it's super familiar with that program.
And that was
I
an
will just-
ask, that was an ask to continue at 3 million.
Is it 3 million?
Yes.
And I will just say, if there is anything else sort of
Yeah, that's the one
missing,
outstanding.
I'm just,
Sorry, I forgot to pick that up last.
So what name did we sell on that? Municipal.
Technical assistance.
It's
program.
it is the Municipal Technical Assistance Grant Program, but I believe in statute it's referred to as Small Business Technical. Somebody, anyway. It's it's like missing middle and housing.
I can speak. to
Colin,
it.
you want to speak to it because it's such an important middle piece of planning financing.
Sure. So this is the fund that VHTV has a role in administering as well on our rural economic development program side. It's an appropriation to the Agency of Administration, which saw that small predominantly rural municipalities were not equally accessing federal funds as larger, more municipalities that have more administrative capacity. And so it provides grant writing and other technical assistance to these small rural municipalities so that they can access funding. The HCD administers a program called the Rural Economic Development Initiative Ready program that does the grant writing support. But these funds are also administered by Vermont Council on Rural Development and other technical assistance providers that work for those communities.
Yes, and we heard from Andy Julo and Melissa Bounty, and we have heard additionally from a couple others about the importance of this. And as far as I also understand it is that they can get some early planning grants, but that this is key for the then next stage of the planning and assessment work that needs to be done in order to actually get to the project. Is that correct?
It does things like help a town like Wilmington write a Northern Borders Regional Commission grant to extend their sewer and water lines, allowing more business and housing development.
As I struggle with communities dealing with the 3-acre permanent rural stormwater, MTAP is just exactly where I think, because it helps with housing and all those things for our small municipalities. So that's a top priority for me. And the other thing, while I have the floor, I'm going to get myself in trouble here. I'm sorry. As I'm looking to try to deal with constrained limited resources, I would prioritize Vermont Serve, Learn, and Earn $2 million agency ask relative to VSAC, but I'm biased. I work at a university and I just know VSAC needs resources. And what I understand about Vermont Serve, Learn, and Earn, which I welcome more education, is that I just would not want that to be redundant to what we're asking our Vermont State colleges to do. And I remember the presentation that they had, they seem to be addressing and building up programs to help with training and certifications and so on. So I'm more supportive of the VSAC full ask and less of currently Serve, Learn, and Earn. But I'm going to hear from people after this.
Right. And I guess I don't think they're duplicative. I think they serve similar populations, but not duplicative populations. Kate, would you like to briefly chat to that? Just identify yourself.
Yeah, Kate Gluckman, Director of Serve Learner. I would say that I listened to y'all grappling with the housing challenge. Where Serve Learner can play a part is on trades training. So, we think about trades training with CTEs, but there are not enough CTE seats right now to get the number of people that we need in the building trades into the labor market. We need programs from Vermont Works for Women, from Resource, from Vermont Youth Conservation Corps, that's getting trained people with the credentials that they need, the skills to work with employers who want to build housing, and all the funding that y'all are working on right now to build that housing. We don't have the people to build it. So I think we work in alignment with our state colleges, but we are helping young people get in, but we're also helping dislocated workers get back into the workforce, helping them get jobs that will sustain their families, that they'll pay taxes with. And so I think we're doing slightly different things, but our critical part of that housing challenge is workforce.
I've spoken too much and stop talking.
No, yeah, this is the conversation. This is what the conversation we need to have. So we have, and just to remind everybody, the Freedom and Unity Scholarship offers last dollar, not the entire tuition, but last dollar scholarships to enrollment through VSAC with families who have incomes of less than $75,000. And the first degree promise, the McClure Foundation, which has been carrying this entirely on its own, is again, their goal is to have it sustained, to pass on that obligation of funding these huge scholarships that they also offer for families of low income. This is, remember, 100% covering the costs at CCB for their education for families with incomes of, I believe, sort of similar amounts. Some no higher comments on it?
Everyone.
Everyone who has income, it's got an income level. No,
I don't think. I could speak really brief. Tom Cheney, Executive Director
Just
of
looking
Vermont. This is not our ask, but we're familiar with the McClure Foundation.
yeah,
And so I won't.
I thought
I defer to them for certain, but their program is called the Free Degree Promise, and it's a program that allows folks, high school seniors who are enrolled in early college
right.
to at any early college program, I believe. Oh no, sorry, this is just CCV.
This is just
CCV, yep, to complete their associate degree 1 year after graduation, and it would be all free.
So it's not for all 4 years. It's for to finish the degree they started in high school.
Correct, that's CCV.
Right.
Yeah, my sense is, I know the program currently is there's no income eligibility for
Right.
this, and I suspect that's what
I think my notes don't have it, so you're
Yeah.
probably right. But what they are working to do is to hand off this program to the legislature to help fund. And the McClure Foundation, as you will recall, has funded this entirely on their own. And their ask is $250,000 for the legislature to begin to take on some of the responsibility for this. Dave.
Can I follow on to Senator Chittenden's comment about serve, learn, and earn?
Yeah.
Versus BSAC. Actually, if the young lady, the director of Vermont Serve, Learn, and Earn can just describe the difference between your program and the Associated General Contractors program. That
Sure.
seems like very different.
Both very important. Ours are, you could consider pre-apprenticeship programs. So these are people who are not currently employed. The AGC is for folks in apprenticeships who are currently employed and need upskilling. So both really critical in terms of building the workforce that we need, but we're getting people into the workforce, they're upskilling so that there's more capacity at their companies.
And that's an important thing. We have funding here from high school right through to an apprenticeship, right through to jobs. So it is a pathway, and we have seen funding mechanisms and funding pieces for stages along that way. And so in an ideal world, we would want to fund the entire bridge into a job that is that enables our young people to stay in Vermont, earn a good living, and scratch all the itches they need. So it's
And I could just add to the technical college too, that they hold the apprenticeship. So those folks are actually already employed, coming in to get the technical training, the upskilling. And so we're just serving a different population. Hopefully they'll go through our program and then enter into the state colleges or AGC's programs.
right. And just while we're so we have I know we need to pivot in a minute to our to addressing the sections in our housing bill, but we do need to come to a landing spot, and we could go a little longer and come back to this at 12 noon. Should we do that? What would you like, Dave?
I just have one quick question.
Yeah, sure.
Did project-based TIFs need any funding
No.
whatsoever?
Not at the moment. We're in good shape on those. I'm hoping. Word from the House is so far so good. So we have the asks we've already made and that have passed, and then our pending asks. What is the committee's pleasure? I'm happy to go line by line. I'm happy to consider. We had talked on Friday or Thursday about looking at housing as a top priority, second priority being economic development, and then we also have, as you will recall, the labor. And in fact, do I see our labor board? Where's our labor board ask? I'm not sure I see that here. Anyway, we have an addition, the labor board ask of 250, which I'm not seeing here. Anyway, isn't it nice to know that we also remember things that are here? The labor relations board ask, it's you'll recall is also here that we've asked. So we need to come to a landing spot. The SAC is, while they are making their own decisions, they have not asked us to work yet within a box. So we can bring our own feelings of constraint, but this is our moment to say what we, as a committee that have heard all this wealth of testimony, where we want to land. Thomas.
So two things. One, in my old city council days, we would, as 5 city councilors, have a very similar spreadsheet to this. And then we would have each city councilor, if you could share the XLS, these PDFs are useless to me, but if you give me the XLSX file, and then each councilor would basically put their priority, pick some numbers within a box, so to speak, and then we would collect the 5 of those, and then that would usually bring us to consensus. I don't know if we have that kind of time. But my other point is, if we want to do that, I'd be happy to coordinate some of the collection of that. But really, what we're trying to get to, saying where the house was, we need to get down to 41 million. And even with the 2 changes where we synchronize it, we're at like 50 million. And then if you add the full 10 million we're asking, we're 20 million over where the house came in. So that's some tougher cuts and prioritizations.
That's true. On the other hand, we've heard perhaps more, and we've, I don't feel constrained at all by the House budget. I think I would, I think that we need to be, I think we need to start with what we want and what we think is important and additive, and then, and realistic. I think that that's a key piece of what we're asking. Maybe you and I could come up with that today before caucus, or think about it. But I would love to have these collected so that we could discuss these and come to a landing spot on each person's, so that we can put them together and have if we can, by tomorrow morning.
Because the spreadsheet, if we had the $50 million that we had to cap out, where would we allocate?
Well, one of the questions and one of the ways to do this, which many organizations do, is they prioritize their priorities. In other words, that once you have the spreadsheet, you sort it by priority so that you can draw a line under the amount of money that you get. Because right now you don't have any guidance of that. The guidance will be someplace else to make the decision.
I'm not sure we have that time unless we can come up with that mechanism.
I think very simple. I agree with the matrix idea. And very simply, give it a score of, 1, 2, or 3.
1 to 10. Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah.
And then you just rank it, and then what gets the highest points.
You said
stays.
spreadsheet.
Patrick, is that something you and I could create, or you and Thomas could create? I'm not.
What I'm gonna offer is, when I head back to my office, it sounds like there's a couple of items that you
There
would
are
like.
2 items in particular that,
Yep, the Labor Relations Board and.
and the impact.
And did I hear correctly that there might be a couple pieces from the housing bill you'd also like to add here, like?
Well, there are
generation?
pending at the moment, I think, unless I'm missing something.
Was there a first generation provision in the housing bill that you passed?
There was a tax credit, but it
So
wasn't.
I can add that as well if you'd like that.
Great, that would be terrific. And I think the other, is there anything, the advocates are in the room, is there anything I'm missing, that we're missing from the asks of H479? Because I've tried to include them all. I think we've got them all here. The additional asks that we're gonna be weighing here. So,
Okay. And
okay,
I'll also double check on where that 15 million VC HP number came from.
yeah, because it's not the 25 the House asked for,
Yeah,
and
no, I
it's not
understand.
whatever we were
I
gonna
understand.
land on. Right. So it is kind of a puzzle.
Yeah.
Spreadsheet, I'll tell you.
But
Yeah, and I'll also distribute.
Right, and then maybe between you and Thomas, we can figure out an easy way to add to that list so that we could just put a number in for each
Yeah, you
thing
can add it on.
and then put it together. And I would ask if that's possible for us to be able to do, so that we can do that tonight. Each committee member could do that.
Yeah, no, I can, before lunch, you'll have an update.
I think we also need to think about these things that are on the pending list so that they don't get kind of separated from our prioritization ranking, because they may not.
I have talked to Andy about doing them slightly separately.
Yeah.
So, they're still gonna be in the big pot, but they have a slightly separate,
I
but
can
I
also-
would put the VHCB ask in the pending, just
Sure.
because we haven't, just as SAT
Sure.
is, we're gonna hear from both of them.
And I can also commingle the pending with the other items if that would make it easier.
I think it doesn't make it easier,
I think it-
unless the committee knows.
I think we need one list.
Okay,
Pending,
Sure.
real, whatever, however you want to coach it. Because I just want to do this once, rank it. and if
yeah, but
done,
it'll be on this, in the same thing. It
Right.
would be
So I'm gonna
listed in
say-
a
I would
separate
put the
box.
same priority against a theoretically pending. as I would.
So you want to have them co-mingled, is that what I hear you saying?
Yeah, they can be marked in separate columns and you know what.
What else
heading
would
and
that
what-
do?
Maybe you could have a
Already
little
done.
star or something next to it.
Give me that. I'll get you something before I leave tonight. And I'll just say, I like the ranking, but I also would just encourage us, if you have a column where you have to balance it out with 50 million, where would you bring over these dollars? And that's a prioritization. And that's what I'm going to do. And if you all.
Okay, so that's your own construction.
Yep.
We have not been
Share it
asked,
with you all, and you can do it if you so choose.
so we have not been asked to function in a particular box yet. We have been asked to identify our priorities. And, that is, we have these totals that you can set your priority to if you want. I mean, some people might set it to the House, some people might set it to the governor's ask. And we heard a rich, the last 2.5 months, we've heard some fabulous testimony that supports a lot of this work. Well, supports all of it. So I would ask that we do that. You and Patrick work on that, and that we can absolutely have a column that financially adds up to whatever your priority funding amount is.
If I may say one last thing, Chair.
I don't think that's the last thing.
I just, from my budgeting experience and from the days of Jane Kitchell, just the defining a box just is a helpful tool, because just putting this as really high priority, that's high priority, it's not going to help them over there. But if you
I
set the
agree, but we have
numbers
not.
and make it fit to a
Right.
amount, that is a lot more useful.
So,
It might be an idea of putting a few agencies who pretend minus numbers on them.
so I
It's
appreciate.
one way to
That's
get
next
to a
year.
total, quite frankly.
Listen.
Everybody wants to spend, but
I would
nobody
know.
wants to not spend.
It's next year.
So no, that is probably this summer, when once the federal budget passes, we are going to be looking, we're going to have a very different lens that we look at our budget through. Let's do this. Let's move on. Thank you very much. Thank you, advocates, for being so dogged and so present, because it was very helpful to have you here in the room as we went through this conversation. What, my dear?
I'm ready the next week.
Okay, great. Patrick, thank you for your help on this.
I'll be in touch.
And more to follow. Great. Thomas, thank you. And I've asked, we haven't gotten it. So, which is okay. So we are going to pivot to our agenda. And we are going to start with the appropriations that were in the housing bill that has come to us from the House, H479. Gus, why don't you, I think Elizabeth and Molly
Yeah, it's like you
are
have,
both on Zoom. So Gus, if you want to save a seat from the gallery and come join us at the table, you'd be welcome.
Okay.
And Polly's here as well. Wow, what a full conversation. This is great. So actually, committee members, keep your sheets apparent and present, because we're going to be addressing these very asks. So Molly, let's begin with you, if we could. The SASH ask is in the housing bill from the House, H479. And I believe it is in at 200,000, is that right?
It's actually 400,000.
400, that's right.
Correct.
So Molly, welcome.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much, Chair Clarkson. For the record, my name is Molly Dugan, and I work at Cathedral Square. So I really appreciate the opportunity to testify on housing-related appropriations this morning. I am going to specifically focus on the SASH for All program. Are you guys getting an echo from me?
I fixed it. Sorry about that.
Good.
All set.
Okay, good. So I am going to focus on SASH for All, but I did want to start off by asking that you do prioritize additional one-time funding for VHCB, beyond the statutorily required funds through PTT and the $5 million that's in the House budget. And that's simply because developers like Cathedral Square and our partners across the state we rely on VHCB funds to do exactly what you all want us to do, which is create housing. We just opened a 24 unit addition to our existing Kelly's Field community for older adults right in the center of Heinsberg. We're in the end phases now of 33 units of permanently affordable housing in downtown St. Albans. That's going to open up this summer. And we're also in the throes of development for a site up also in Franklin County in the village of Highgate. So, juggling these kinds of multiple projects at all different levels of completion is what Cathedral Square and the rest of our partners are doing in all parts of the state to try to solve this housing crisis. And, we want to keep doing this. There's a lot of momentum. We're serving people across the income spectrum. We're preventing homelessness by the services that we, have available in our housing. In Reed Commons, we have 6 apartments that are going to be reserved for people coming out of homelessness. So it's this kind of housing that's also going to make sure we don't have to, spend so much money on homelessness response, because if we can get people housing, that's where we want to be. So I do hope that you will consider the 25 million in one-time request that H479 had. So with that,
Just to be clear, because I don't know where that 15 number came from, because I am functioning with the 25 million ask that's in H479, the 5 million that the House actually funded, which is, yeah. And
yes,
and they funded that, also knowing that the BAA wasn't happening. So what's discouraging is that I thought, well, the 5 billion was in addition to the 8 point, whatever it is. So we're really looking at more like 13 or 14 million. But no, that's at the moment simply at 5 billion.
right. That's my understanding.
Yeah. Fully fund the House ask, which was 25 million.
Yes, that's what I'm asking. So
Yeah.
All right, so I'm gonna pivot to SASH for All because I know time is of the essence here. So with the SASH for All request, we're at a minimum we're looking for 400,000, and this
Molly, just back up. We have 2 new members. SASH stands for.
Oh yeah, so I'm going to get to that absolutely. So SASH stands for Support and Services at Home, and what SASH for All is actually it's an innovative pilot that we've built off what most of you know as the traditional SASH model, which has been operating in the state for over 13 years, which serves primarily older adults and those with disabilities. So that has been, and that's a model that has been proven over many years to do 2 things: improve the health and well-being of those participating, number 1, and then number 2, do that and also significantly slow the growth in healthcare spending in both Medicare and Medicaid. And so the SASH for All, we started just over 3 years ago to serve a younger population because the traditional SASH has been working so well. So the SASH for All brings the kind of successful core elements of traditional SASH to a younger population living in affordable housing. And so we have been piloting that in southwestern Vermont for the past few years. Elizabeth Bridgewater is here. She, with Wyndham and Windsor Housing Trust, she's one of the 2 housing organizations that have been operating the pilot. And so what we want to continue the pilot, and ultimately we want to spread the program across the state through the existing network. So to spread it across the state would be an additional 2 million, which seems a bit out of reach given the earlier discussion, but the 400,000 would at a minimum continue the pilot and the incredible work that's happening there so that we are ready to expand when the funding is available. So what I wanted to do just quickly is share with you a few slides of some of the outcomes we've seen in the SASH for All pilot. If I can do that, I'm going to try to share my screen.
That would be great, but I also think for us it would be helpful if you could illustrate a supportive service for a younger person. Because when we talk about younger people, we're talking about people who are at home for some reason and either disabled or developmentally disabled. So illustrate for us the support you offer and the population you're offering it to.
Yes, I can do that. As soon as I find, here it is. Okay, hopefully this is going to work. Okay, do you see my screen now?
Yes. And we have your presentation actually printed out.
Oh, perfect. Okay. All right. So Sash for All is serving, as I said, a younger population. Average age is 40. And it's serving people currently living in affordable housing down in southwestern Vermont. Now we have about 250 people participating in the Sash for All pilot at Wyndham Windsor Housing Trust, some of their properties, and Brattleboro Housing Partnerships. About half of that 250 people are children. So we're serving younger adults and adults with families. So that's important. And then what you'll see here is all the different local partners, their logos that are part of this initiative. The housing organizations are not doing this on their own. So that's my point here. And the 4 focus areas of Sash for All is number 1, to prevent homelessness. Number 2, to break down barriers to services. Number 3, access healthcare. And then number 4, to build healthy neighbor relations. So I'm going to continue. So the program structure quickly is we embed in these organizations a full-time community health worker, a part-time wellness nurse, RN, and an emotional wellness clinician. The mental health clinician is hired through the local mental health agency, or a local mental health agency in the area. And so this team is working with those partner organizations to serve the people participating in Sash for All.
I met some of this team in the governor's visit to Windsor.
Yes, on Monday. Yes. Wonderful. Okay, so I'm just going to pivot to quickly now is some of the outcomes that we've seen. So again, I mentioned that this is serving a younger population, average age of 40. Half of the participants are children. And so, who we're serving is, a lot of, young adults with families, getting through their days, working, getting the kids to school. You can imagine it. So what we're seeing is this is a little mix of kind of a data profile of who we're serving, and well, not who we're serving, but kind of what they're experiencing, as well as some of the outcomes we're seeing. So we're seeing, we have a standard assessment that we're doing with our participants, seeing a lot of food insecurity, a lot of challenges with families and these adults kind of getting to their appointments, and this includes even like work, trying to get to work due to lack of transportation. We have, and I'm going to talk more about this, but we've seen some really good outcomes around homelessness prevention. So since September of 22, 19 evictions have been prevented. Just in this year, 9 have been prevented. There's a lot of touches, as you can see here. So there's a lot of, visits between the staff, those 3 staff members, and the participants. So this is a very much a relationship driven program, and having the presence where people live allows you to have this kind of regular interaction. The average number of visits with participants per year is 26. So you get a sense these are a lot of visits with folks.
So they're sort of, for our understanding, they're sort of like case managers attached to a family who are enabling the family both to address things that would send them into homelessness, so preventing homelessness. It strikes me that these are like sort of community care coordinators.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different names, Chair. So, case manager means something very specific to certain agencies, but I'll just say,
only to those agencies. I think for the outside, they are managing a family, or they're
they're partnering. I think I would say partnering, because this is a really big aspect of this is autonomy. So, this is a completely voluntary program, and the Sash for All staff are absolutely pulling up a chair next to folks and saying, we're here to partner with you. What is it that you want to work on? How can we help break down these access barriers? I mean, it's clear how difficult it is for folks to access all of the amazing services right in their community, because a lot of times they don't even know about them. And so having people that are embedded where they live and coming to their homes and providing these opportunities has just been amazing. I did want to share quickly some of the outcomes that we've seen recently. And I do want to say, we're doing these regular assessments with our participants, and we absolutely ask questions around health. This is part of it. And, one of the things that we're seeing is a really good drop in those participants that are presenting at the emergency room. And what we know is that half of the adults participating in SASH for All we're presenting in the emergency room in the last 12 months. So we're clearly have an issue with people, not accessing, obviously there's times when it's absolutely appropriate to go to the emergency department. But what our staff was finding is it's an issue with people not being attached to a primary care provider, not having access to talk to somebody about their medical challenges. So what we've seen over the past between 2023 and 2024 is a really nice reduction in participants presenting to the ED. And again, I mentioned the average age is 40. So this is not like the traditional SASH model where your average age is closer to 80. So these are younger adults that are using the EDs this often. So we're working hard on that. We also know that the top chronic conditions of the people in SASH for All are mental health related. And so that's another thing that our staff are working very closely with them on. As I mentioned, we have an embedded mental health clinician. We're also working with the mental health community partners to, again, break down the access challenges. And so, again, we've seen some really good improvements. So you can see the data here around general anxiety, we're seeing improvements there, as well as, suicidal ideation. So we ask the tough questions. And we start the discussions and we get people connected to the support that they need. And I wanted to focus also on loneliness. So there's a validated loneliness screen as well that we do with our participants. And this is there's more and more that's been learned about the impact of loneliness on people, and has, besides it just being a horrible thing to feel, has correlations to physical health challenges as well. So getting a handle on these kinds of challenges when people are younger will have a huge impact going forward, not only on them as adults, but their children as well. And so this is, so SASH for All really is such an incredible prevention program. And those are the key things I wanted to kind of leave you all with. And I do, as I mentioned, Elizabeth Bridgewater is also here, and I'm going to figure out how to stop sharing. But I want to see if you all have any quick questions.
Yes, Randy has a question for you.
Okay, I'm just trying to figure out how to stop sharing. Here we go.
Okay, Randy.
You look like you did some great things from what I see here. I know, though, that there are other organizations in Vermont that do similar things. Is there an overlap?
Thanks for raising that, Senator.
Other organizations in Vermont that do similar things.
Yeah, so we really deal with that head on, because the last thing we want to do is duplicate services. There's too much work that people need to do. So one of the core elements of the traditional SASH model and SASH for All is that we have a memorandum of understanding with those partner organizations out in the community. So that one slide I showed you all the logos of the different partner organizations. So they become a team. So the staff from all of those organizations become a team, and they're meeting regularly, they're communicating regularly, and therefore ensuring that, this is what I'm working on with this shared client. This is what you are. And there's regular communication. The whole point of that formalized agreement is to ensure we're not duplicating services.
But when you have a particular individual, let's say, that is one of your clients, how do the other organizations know that you have a client that they can provide services to as well? Is there any name sharing, or is this dependent to a great extent, which is one of the issues that I've heard, is that the coordinator, the individual involved who's aiding a person, has to be pretty knowledgeable about what this network is, and if they aren't, or if they aren't as new, that's where the duplication and confusion develops. How do you
Yeah.
deal with
No. So the folks that are participating in SASH and SASH for All, they sign a consent to agree to information sharing. So that's what's different, is that we have a process. And so our SASH and SASH for All staff are walking them through, this is what it means to participate in our model. This is how we're going to provide this wraparound support with the other organizations. And in order for us to do this, you have to consent to this kind of information sharing. And
And the
again,
other-
it's voluntary, and they do it.
The other organizations with whom you deal also have a similar arrangement? Because I've not heard of that from some of the other organizations that are in this space.
Well, so the other organizations that are partnering with SASH, that's the SASH Memorandum of Understanding outlines that is what is being signed. And yeah, that's all part of it.
So we have 5 minutes. Damien has we have to turn to Damien at 11, and we still need to hear, and we need to make some more time for VHCB. But Elizabeth, if you're here to weigh in on SASH, we have 5 minutes for you to weigh in on either SASH or VHCB ask.
Okay, thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. For the record, my name is Elizabeth Bridgewater, and I'm the Executive Director of the Wyndham and Windsor Housing Trust. I think Molly did a really wonderful job outlining the outcomes of SASH. I just want to highlight one thing, and then I do want to make a comment about VHCB and bookend our presentation and end there. An example of what we're doing to address some of the social isolation and food insecurity is what we call Make Soup Together. So we're not just providing food, we're actually providing opportunities for people to prepare food together. So everybody gets, a knife and a chopping board and some vegetables, and over, a few hours actually make a pot of soup together. And then they get food that they can take home, and they've developed some relationships with each other in the building. And that's an example of why we're seeing that loneliness measure drop. So that's just one example. And I've been participating in some of these meetings myself, just because it's a great way to get connected to, just be close to the mission. And it's just been really inspiring, some of the relationships that I'm seeing develop among our residents in different buildings that we own. I want to highlight, Molly highlighted the importance of the HCB funding for the rental properties, and we certainly have a pipeline of rental properties as well. But we also develop home ownership opportunities, and VHCB is a critical resource in that space. And I just want to share a couple of things. Just looking at, for those of you that are unfamiliar with the Shared Equity Program, it's a program that provides a fairly substantial down payment assistance grant. So it helps people of moderate incomes get over the barrier for entry. So it's helping the initial family get into home ownership, but then with the permanent affordability restriction, it's ensuring that home is now in the, is permanently affordable for multiple generations to come. And it's part of the housing stock that will not rise in value as there's fluctuations in the marketplace. Before the pandemic, we were seeing about 10 transactions over a 3-year period. During the pandemic, we saw 7. In the last 3 years, we've seen 25. So the demand for this program is increasing in our area of the state. And so it's really critical that we have the resources available that we can meet the needs of the home buyers. We actually have 11 active home buyers that are both already income qualified and mortgage ready that need that type of subsidy in order to get into home ownership. So we've got a lot of demand happening in the first quarter this year. We're also doing some work around developing new home ownership opportunities as opposed to buyers buying existing homes. And we've got 14 active units in the pipeline, one that's already been permitted as part of a larger multi-phase rental/home ownership development in West Brattleboro. And then another 6 in Putney. And the thing about the Putney project that's really exciting is we engaged a group of architectural students to create a model that could use modular construction in a really efficient and economic way, and that could be replicated in more of the rural communities. And they presented their work, and they're competing all over New England as part of this project.
Oh, cool.
And they came up with a really innovative kind of village pocket park kind of small scale homeownership neighborhood that I think was presented to the Putney community last weekend and was really well received. So these are some examples of some of the work that we're doing in the homeownership space, and we certainly couldn't do it without VHCB funding, because they are the key resource for the shared equity program that really helps moderate income homeowners get over that barrier to entry. So I hope that,
Elizabeth,
yes.
Elizabeth, we would love to have you come back when we're not so pressed for time and actually share with us that that community, in the proposed community in Putney. It would be interesting to see. Also, I think for this committee, very interesting to see what it actually saves in construction. What those, how much you estimate to save in constructing out of those modular units.
I would love to come back and highlight that. So I won't go into any more detail about it, but it was such an exciting innovation in what we're doing, engaging the students, that I wanted to share that as an example of what we're doing in homeownership.
Thank you so much. And thank you for making time for us today.
Thank you.
I'm going to ask Gus and Polly to be patient. I apologize, because Damien has to leave. At 11:20, or 11:25, we're going to begin our conversation about appeals with zoning. But I'd love to have you two just stick, because I don't think Damien's going to be very long. It's a short piece. Thank you. I apologize. Gus, there's a spot right here.
I appreciate everybody.
Yeah. No,
making
we
room
appreciate
today.
you. So we're, as you know, we're taking up sections that were not in our bill, in our housing bill. This is a proposal for a task force on universal design. And I've had a lot of back and forth this weekend with Elizabeth Rose, who proposed this in the house, and we'll have her in as well. But Damien, and we had Scott Campbell, just to remind you, we had Scott Campbell come in on Friday to talk about how it could be incorporated in the current task force. It doesn't sound like that is going to be as possible as I had hoped, but Damien, if you'd be kind enough to talk to us about the universal design in section 4 of H479.
Sure. So section 4 of H479 would create a study committee that would be looking at implementation of universal design standards for all residential buildings statewide. So before we go further with that, it's worth noting that we already have some accessibility standards for some residential buildings, but not all residential buildings. So if you're in a 4-unit building, you're already subject to basic universal design requirements around, at a minimum, find the right chart here. All right. So all units, if you're served by an elevator, all units have to be what's known as adaptable, which means that they're not necessarily fully accessible at this point, but that they can easily be adapted to become an accessible unit. If you have 4 or more dwelling units, but they're not all served by an elevator, then the ground floor units have to be accessible, and the other units have to be what's known as visible, which means that you have the entrance to the unit is a width that's wide enough to allow access for someone in a wheelchair. I believe it's 36 inches. And then that you have a pathway through the house that's 32 to 36 inches wide and allows access to a bathroom. But it does not mean that the whole dwelling unit has to be accessible. So that's already required when you have 4 or more dwelling units.
So that's already required in law.
Or if you fall within the public building rubric, so that's our 4 or more dwelling unit buildings, you're already required to have that.
Is it all buildings, or is it subsidized buildings, or is it all commercial buildings?
All commercial and then residential with 4 or more units.
Right. regardless of who funds.
You're subject to the Vermont accessibility standards once you're up in that public building standard, which includes state buildings, municipal buildings, commercial buildings, and then the larger residential buildings with 4 or more units. It excludes single family residences. It excludes smaller apartment structures, accessory dwelling units, things like that. The universal design standards, if you adopted it for all residential buildings, would essentially take it down to those smaller buildings. Representative Campbell came in and talked to you about the Act 151 study committee. Well, one of the things they're looking at is whether or not the state should adopt a statewide building code.
Right, but he said they haven't even gotten to that yet.
Right.
So I actually have,
So as part of that, you could incorporate universal design into that. The universal design, some aspects of it are incorporated in the building codes, some are not. Some of them are sort of features that you would strive for. Some of them are required by federal housing programs under federal law, but not necessarily for everything. So if you look at the guidelines from the Vermont Housing Finance Agency, they have got qualified allocation plan standards for certain structures that go beyond the Vermont accessibility requirements. But again, these are subsets in our funding will have requirements. Vermont is somewhat unique in that we've adopted parts of the building code in our building and fire safety code, but not all of it. There's also a residential building code that's specifically tailored to 1 and 2 family houses, which Vermont has not adopted, but which could be adopted. One of the big issues we run into is we have very limited state government resources. And if you're going to adopt the code and have it mean anything, it means you have to have some sort of enforcement and inspection to ensure that people are building to it. Another piece of this is is kind of understanding how the different codes work with each other. So we have our residential building energy standards, which basically what that's looking at is energy efficiency within the structure. It's the envelope, keeping heat in, reducing airflow through the building envelope, improving interior air quality through ventilation, using efficient appliances, etc. The building code is essentially the structure. So you think of that as the bones of the building. It's making sure that the structure is stable and safe. And durable. And that definitely overlaps with the energy code in a lot of places, but there are areas where the energy code deals more with the envelope in ways that the building code may not. Universal design really overlaps with the build code end of things. It's talking about how you build the structure to ensure that it's accessible. And really what you're looking at is a requirement that all new construction, if you went to a universal design standard, depending on how far you went, if it was accessible, you'd have to have the full first floor be accessible. If it's a visitable standard, it's meaning that you could have someone who has a mobility disability visit and be able to use the bathroom, be able to get into the unit, but not necessarily be able to access everything on the first floor. The issue with your working group that you have currently is they are very much focused on the building envelope. And then the question of, would it be helpful for us to have a residential building code to address some of the durability questions that we've encountered with the residential building energy standards, and which are partially addressed by the 2024 standards, which have included more provisions on moisture management. But it doesn't necessarily get to the question of universal design, which is more focused on access for everyone.
right. And I have come to appreciate that. What I also come to appreciate is that the Act 151 study group hasn't yet managed to make it to the statewide building code standards.
Right.
And so it strikes me that maybe if they haven't gotten to it yet, that maybe that would be a smart thing to marry into the universal task force and have them Because those two go hand in glove. I mean, they actually all go hand in glove, but nobody's seeming to have the time to do both, and we need both. I think there are certainly, so might we consider bringing, liberating these statewide building code standards out of that task force and marrying them here? My concern is that we're doing universal code independent of this other huge piece that they need to be all considered together. And so it strikes me that it would make some sense to pull the standards into this and do both universal and statewide building code work together. What's your thought on that?
They certainly have a lot of overlap in a way that energy code and universal design do not necessarily have that same overlap. One of the questions I would have would be just the membership of your
we can address that
task force.
I think that it's already under builders are not even on there. I mean, the universal.
You do have a couple of builder representatives on there, but it's
not enough. Yeah.
The other piece is just whether you may want to consider something where you're looking at an overall study committee and then subcommittees.
Yes.
And maybe the subcommittee membership expands to add folks who are focused on those issues. But then you have a more discrete overall committee that can put everything together at the end. I don't know what the best way forward on it is, but it does strike me that you have a very large, much larger than we normally do for the study committee.
It's way big.
Yeah. And that can just create problems in terms of getting everyone to meet, getting people to make a decision, etc. And that's difficult and time consuming. That said, there are a lot of groups there that have a lot of important.
But they can all be stakeholders that can be asked to testify. I mean, stakeholders are referred to all the time in our task forces, where we can make a smaller task force and ask the task force to incorporate the work of all the stakeholders in the course of their work.
Right. The other thing that I would just flag for you is if you're going to look at a statewide building code or a residential building code that applies to 1 and 2 family or something like that, is that you will probably want them to look at things like how do we implement this? What are the cost impacts, and will it impact any of our various housing subsidy programs or other things? Not to say that it necessarily will have negative impacts, but there may be some unintended consequences. And it's worth exploring those just to understand we're here, we're looking to get to here. Are there any pitfalls or diversions on that road that we need to be aware of? So that's probably something you would want to have them look at. And then I would make the universal design, if that's something you want, I would make that an explicit point in there, because it's residential or universal building code is not the same as universal design. There are areas where they overlap.
Right.
But universal design definitely goes beyond that.
I would like our committee to think about how we make more efficient use of the task force. And because there are a couple options, it strikes me, that we have at the moment. One is we can just let this go through and do an independent task force on universal design. We could also try and be effective about having a committee that is already in statute. Maybe we add the universal design to that committee's charge and incorporate that and have them look at that as they're looking at the statewide building code standard, and just add it to them, to their purview and charge. Or we could bring the statewide standards, bring it into this study and it could be done with subcommittees. It could be with however they want to be managed. But it strikes me that they haven't yet started on that statewide residential building code standard. So it now may be a good opportunity to to have them thoughtfully consider universal design as they look at a statewide building code. Is
Yeah.
everyone sort of following along? And
If you do that, you may want to extend that study committee for a
Correct.
year.
correct, it's only
Um,
through this fall, I think. Is that correct?
Yeah, their final report's due in November.
Right. So I
And
think,
so you may want to say interim report with a final report due
Right.
November 26th.
right.
Is,
I'd love to have you think about how we could do this gracefully and efficiently. I mean, I'm trying to be effective and thoughtful about it.
yeah, I think it's worth hearing from stakeholders on whether, for example, the current committee, whether they think that they're properly constituted to fully consider universal design. I think you have a lot of folks on that committee who have a lot of experience with building safety and so forth. But you've also got groups like Burlington Electric and Vermont
Yeah,
Gas
no.
Systems, which are clearly on the
Right.
energy end of things.
And Scott's testimony on Friday was helpful, and I think, and we can have him by Zoom a little later in the week. But I just like to have us think about how can we do this with the structure we've already created, and or how can we do this and add to it something that we have asked for in our
Right.
other acts
Yeah, it'd be fairly easy to amend the Act 151 working group.
to include
Yep.
with some different stakeholders, obviously.
Yep, to potentially bring in other stakeholders and then update their reporting requirements and so forth. But I do think it's worth hearing from them as to whether they
Yeah.
think that that's something that's in their wheelhouse. And if not, then potentially looking at a slightly modified version of this study committee. And also considering how much time it will take to discuss these things.
Yeah. The challenge is having that discussion in separate rooms. I mean, it needs to be discussed all together, in my humble opinion, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe, but it's pretty hard to have a universal design task force here and then figure out how to glom it onto and incorporate it into the statewide standards once they've set those. I mean, those should be set in conjunction with each other, it strikes me.
Right, as far as building code goes, you can definitely adopt them separately. Some states have, where these have been adopted. But in some ways, having one document that says, that has certain prescriptive standards that you need to meet, or address at least in your design, that there is some potential efficiency to that. Again, I do want to emphasize I'm not an architect and I'm not a builder. And I'm also not someone who's financing the development of housing. And so I don't want to speak for them on the benefits or drawbacks
Right.
of that.
So-
I know how the codes work together, but I don't know how things go out in the real world and what the pros and cons of these different approaches are. So I would really encourage you to hear from the stakeholders on whether one approach makes more sense than the other. Either way, Cameron and I can work to get the language modified.
Right.
So,
Any questions for Damien at the moment? Because we're now our time is completely screwed up. I apologize. We have had too much good conversation. So Ellen, we need to hear from VHCB because they are a piece of the financial, we need about, Gus, what would we? How much?
Well, it depends on how many questions you have.
Okay,
Thank you for
because I
your
think
time.
if you don't mind waiting, Damien, thank you very much.
very well.
Much to consider. I think we need to turn back to Gus and Polly, for 10 minutes if we can. Josh and Sam, and Ellen, we're gonna aim to start at 11:30.
11:30.
Okay? Right, sorry, there we are. Did everybody follow that idea? Okay, great.
Okay,
Gus and Polly, it's good to have you. And we are here because for many reasons, we are great housing partners. But as you know, the House Bill H 479 appropriated 25 million, asked to appropriate 25 million to support your incredible work. So we know that the House budget actually only passed 5 million of that. We know that the BAA did not pass at all, and that had
8.5, I believe.
8.5 million of additional money for VHCB. So in that context, we give the floor to you.
Okay, for the record, Gus Seelan, Director for the Housing and Conservation Board. I'll be very brief, but we haven't been in since early January. Had this from
Right.
A few things. First, I just want to start off by saying the work you've been doing on housing bills over the last 3 years has been really incredible. We've opened a shelter in St. Johnsbury because of the Homes Act.
Yeah.
We got a project permitted in Waterbury that might not have if you hadn't passed similar legislation. Our funding this year went up because of the change that was made in the transfer tax last year in a significant way in terms of our base
good.
funding. So we really appreciate all of that. This first slide is just to remind you of what we've been up to since 2020 when we've had an incredible amount of resources, and we thank you for it. It's touched every part of the housing market. You've just been talking about accessibility. We do that all the time. You heard from Elizabeth on home ownership. We appreciate the kind words that you heard from the HFA earlier today. I don't think Chad was making that case just because they like us, but also because the HFA would like to continue to work with us to unlock and utilize the 4% tax credit, which is virtually unlimited, and with which we together funded about 1,000 units of housing that are embedded in these numbers over the last 4 years. And we know that we're in a place where we're going to be cutting back. We've done what we think is transformational work in helping to build new neighborhoods. And the point I would simply make is in lots of these cases, Stonecrop Meadows as one example, but St. Albans TIF District as another. Often the first projects that get done are the affordable housing projects. Cambrian Rise is yet another. And what that does for a private developer is it helps them absorb some of their upfront costs, their permitting costs, their infrastructure costs, and then makes market rate development go further. We're about to consider a proposal, Madam Chair, in your district of 48 units, but it will unlock and speed up the development of 192 market units because it's a priority housing project. So affordable housing development goes hand in hand with market development on a regular basis. There's many benefits to VHCB housing. It's included infill and mobile home parks. It's included conversion of historic buildings, and it's included home ownership for lots of people. And you see a great increase in the participation of Habitat all over the state. These are our funding commitments by year, and what we're about to do is to go down by about 3/4 in our capacity. So I'm not going to dwell on this, but I think the House's message was simply, we'd like you not to go down by 3/4, but to go down by half. So very simply, if you could find $25 million, it would double our, just about double our capacity in the coming year. Again, transformational investments in downtowns all over the state that have other economic impacts. And I think that's why you're seeing communities invest in and prioritize these buildings. We were just at a building with a governor in downtown Windsor where we cleaned up a polluted site and we're getting new housing. So those are the values that we want to continue to bring. We clearly will have to cut back. And then lastly, supportive housing of all sorts, sometimes in conjunction with downtown projects, such as this one in Waterbury, which again, your legislation helped the DRB reverse their standing in opposition to be in favor of this. This is now under construction, and it will be one of 3 projects that is supporting people with intellectual and developmental disabilities that we're funding this year. And then lastly, and to get to the financial aspect that your colleagues in appropriations need to be considering, is that our partners all over the state are helping people move from being unhoused, being in motels, being in the woods, to being housed. And that means better outcomes for our correction system, for our healthcare system, and for our GA program. If you think of 1,659 households that had to continue to be housed in motels. You're talking about an expenditure, even at today's minimums of 80 days, of tens of millions of dollars. So that's one of the things that this network across the state has been able to give to the state, is to help bring those people out of a state of homelessness and into safer housing where they have much more opportunity to thrive than when they're living in a motel room, living in a shelter, or living in the woods. So I think I know you're on this tight time frame.
No, but this is the biggest ask in the housing bill, and it's critically important that we hear and appreciate it.
Yeah.
So
What I will say to you is, whether we're going to break ground on a 30-unit project in Rutland in a couple of weeks, we broke ground in one in West Rutland, all over the state, you're seeing development happen. Production is going to slow down of affordable housing no matter what we do, because we're not going to have the same resources. Now, the chair of appropriations has been pretty clear that $25 million is a big ask. You mentioned that the BAA had passed with $8.5 million more in it. I hope that you can get to a number somewhere between 8.5 and 25.
yeah,
But anything you can do to prioritize continuing to build this housing, because it's serving people who very much need, it's serving the workforce, it's helping people into home ownership, it's doing the social justice part of our work for farm workers, it's helping people with disabilities not have to go into a nursing home.
Yeah.
All those goods are things we're trying to accomplish with our resources, along with the transformational investments that are building the new neighborhoods with private sector players. So that's our story. And
you're sticking with it.
and we are sticking with it, and we appreciate the great work that's been done on policy around housing, along with the funding. The policy without the funding will mean, private market can build housing, but it's going to cost $500,000, $600,000, $700,000 per unit.
Yeah.
And lots of people, most of the workforce can't afford that today. And that's the role that we play, is to help bridge that, whether it's home ownership or rental housing.
Any questions for Gus? Polly, do you have anything you want to add?
I think Gus said it all.
Okay, sure.
I just want to underscore something Gus said quickly and quietly at the beginning, which is that the property transfer tax on non-primary residences has added to the pie. And
We just, for our new members, we passed that
last year,
last year, and the estimate this year,
it's exceeded the estimated
since it went into effect August 1st last year,
Right.
it has brought in how much roughly?
I don't have that number in my head. I mean, you appropriate a specific amount.
Right.
Right.
But
13.
Well, the whole thing,
Wait, but-
let me just be clear, it's a percentage that
Right.
goes to the HCB, so it wouldn't be fair of them to try and figure out the whole amount.
Yeah, no,
The estimate was 14 million,
Right, the
but
14
things are coming in at or about. So we're gonna hear Big Song and Dance about how hard it is to figure out what's a non-primary residence, that this is the best way we have to figure that out, is to do it and do it a messy job and have people tell us we got it wrong. And as I understand it, the House Education Reform Bill is coming over with a study of looking at non-primary residences for the property tax, not the property transfer tax. And I think we can do better. And I think that would be the most significant housing policy we could pass.
right. No, I know. And we've had an email exchange about it. Because I agree. I don't disagree. I think that is important. So we have also for new members, we have the PTT.
I think they know what the PTT is.
No,
Property
it's for
transfer
new
tax.
members, but this is in addition to what you already get from the PTT.
yes, it was an increase, and I did mean to be quick. I did not mean to be quiet.
You're always quieter than, let's just say that.
I've been told by many people I'm understated, and I guess I would rather promise
That's
and
okay.
over deliver as a
That's
strategy.
good.
That's okay. That's our
You're just
job to be
yelling
the noisier advocates, which is okay. I think we embrace that.
But there's nothing harder for any legislature than to decide you want to raise revenue. I've been around long enough to
Right.
know that, so being willing to figure out a creative way to do that is really important. And I think
So the other thing you haven't touched on, which we of course touched on last week in our Wednesday and Thursday joint hearings, is the impact that inevitably will happen also with the cost, with the trade tariffs of steel and lumber, which will also sadly have an impact on what we're actually able to, when you look at slowing down.
yes, there's nothing that I can see that will be good about tariffs in terms of meeting our housing needs.
I think if I can speak to that a little bit as well, we see communities respond to the type of housing projects they bring to us based on economic circumstances. A response we could see and would likely see is how affordable housing developers wanting to purchase buildings that are going to see big rent increases, displacing residents, purchase those, keep them affordable so that we don't see increasing homelessness. And that's a way they're shifting their strategy. They're not kind of building, they're not buying new lumber, but they are still creating additional affordable homes and preventing displacement.
Yes.
Yeah, just as an example of that, 5 or 6 years ago, a project called Dorset Commons that you may be familiar with, Senator, in South Burlington, over 100 units. And the rents, it's what we call the Class B property, the sort of thing that somebody would invest in. Rents were a little over $1,000 to $1,300 a month, working people living there. And had an out-of-state investor bought it, it would have easily become $1,800 to $2,000. And instead, CHT stepped in with some help from us to keep it affordable. So we may see the need
Right.
of more strategies like that.
We've needed you. And so, yeah, we've had a lot, sadly, many of those. Much of that has happened in Lincoln.
And I think the other place we're doing that is with manufactured home communities, helping them preserve that naturally occurring affordable housing by investing in infrastructure there. Right. So that's another strategy we're going to continue to pursue.
So thank you both so much. If Ellen's out there, we should bring Ellen in. Sam, would you be kind enough to
I didn't
grab Ellen? Right, perfect. Gus and Polly, thank you so much.
Thank you for
So
squeezing
somewhere
us in
between
on-
8.5 and 25.
We're gonna have that growth of time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Yeah, and Sam, is Ellen there?
She's not.
Okay.
I think this house Charlie and Judge Zonis are here.
Okay, great.
Okay, ma'am.
So Ellen has disappeared. Great.
Outside. I appreciate that.
Chad, thank you very much.
I'm gonna stick around.
Oh, okay, great. So take a break if needed. Ellen, come join us.
Did you want to start?
Yes, we're just gonna have you tee it up again and remind us where we are, and then we're gonna go to Judge Zonay, Charlie Baker, and then Josh Hanford. And what we're pivoting to now is we're moving from money to a different type of money, appeals. So, which represents a different.
Ellen Tchaikovsky, Office of Legislative Counsel. So, page 479, starting with section 8. These are the sections related to housing appeals. So sections 8, 9, and 10 work together to change the current standards for municipal permit appeals on who can appeal. So currently it's interested persons can appeal, and changing that definition slightly to still allow interested persons to appeal, but it's getting rid of two of the types of categories under that and switching it to person aggrieved. And that is a person who alleges an injury to a particularized interest protected by the chapter. So it's getting rid of the any 20 persons standard or person in the immediate neighborhood of the project.
Right. And and that is section 8 and 9 and
10.
And 10 and then 11.
11 is the part about no hearing is required for bylaw updates that are required by the statute. 12 is a date change on the LURP study.
Right. Right, and that's on the second page. Okay. So we had asked to comment on this, Judge Zoni, I think we'll begin with you.
Oh, there's two other things that the court might be interested in. So there's the language regarding the standard that's going to be for review of the municipal permit decisions regarding housing. It's kind of just a restatement of what they're already doing. And then additionally, there's a provision being added in section 9 about prioritizing appeals of permit decisions for housing development.
And I think that is where we definitely have asked. Thank you, Thomas.
Do you want me to
This is- Yeah,
Does that work? Thank you.
yeah, it does. Good.
I learned something new.
Right. So I think there's several pieces. Judge Sony, are you with us? Ah, there you are.
I am. Good morning.
I want to stay. Okay, great. Sure. Good morning. We would love to have you have the court weigh in, VLCT. We identified also as and the RPCs to weigh in on these sections, and the floor is yours.
Right. Thank you. Good morning. Tom Zone, Chief Superior Judge. I agree with Legislative Counsel that if you go to page 19, which is section 9, lines 4 through 9, that's already what occurs. The court looks at the appeal, and if it's an appeal from a denial, it considers whether the application is consistent with the bylaw. If it's an appeal from a grant, it considers whether it's consistent with the bylaw. In other words, this doesn't add anything, but what it does do is it brings with it the potential for some questions. Because anytime there's legislative enactments, the tenets of statutory construction indicate that that the legislature puts language in advisedly, and there's a reason for everything that goes in. And so attorneys and the court would be looking at, well, why did this go in? Currently, what happens is after an appeal is filed, there's a statement of questions that is filed that indicate what are the areas in dispute. And it is questionable whether or not by having it say that the court shall determine if the application is consistent with the municipal bylaw or land use regulation, is the court supposed to look at all the bylaws, even the ones that aren't at issue? And so that's something that could occur. The other thing I note here is on line 7, I think there should possibly be a comma after the word or to set that apart, because I don't think it reads quite right. But I will defer to individuals who have a higher degree of grammar knowledge than I do. But I think it should be set off.
I'm sorry, actually, this is more of a departure, but are we gonna try and do our budget recommendations today?
We've been working on them in the morning. We worked on them from 10.
Are we approving
And
it today?
I'll fill you in on what we decided to do.
Okay.
We're working on it.
So we're not
gonna-
finishing it today.
We're hopefully I'll fill you in.
Okay.
I'll fill you in at 12.
Judge Zoni, I'm trying to follow your language. Could you refresh me? This is H 479 we're talking about?
It is correct.
Section 9.
What?
Section 9.
It's section 9, page 19 on the unofficial version as passed by the House. It's section 9, if you go to subsection H, as in Henry, entitled de novo hearing.
Okay, thank you.
Really. And so I just point out that there's some potential questions about why is this being put in? Generally, it's what we already do already. And is that intended to change what the court does? And again, I would note that there's a question about the comma. On page 20, which is the same subsection, section 9, on subsection 5, lines 12 through 15 says, except for cases the court considers of greater importance. And what this does, it says the court has to appeal municipal decisions involving housing developments, and they take precedence on the docket. I think it's important to understand that the court prioritizes essentially all cases. And how it works is once an appeal is filed, there's a status conference, and the parties will appear and discuss how much time they need for discovery. The court then enters a discovery order that gives the parties adequate time to prepare for the case. The court right now, if there was parties that came into that status conference and said, Judge, we are ready for trial immediately. My understanding is that if it's a 1 or 2 day trial, that can be scheduled within the next 30 to 60 days. The court is on top of scheduling these matters. Parties are entitled to reasonable discovery, and there can be delays in discovery in some cases. But what's important to keep in mind as far as prioritization is that the judges are well aware of the need to move the housing cases forward. And I can tell you that there was even a recent matter where I understand the attorneys came in where it was a legal issue and they wanted 6 months for discovery. And the court said, wait a minute, you don't need that long. And the court was the one that brought the parties back. Additionally, when you look at this section, it's unclear what housing development means. Does it mean a single family, if you have a cabin a seasonal cabin that's being turned into a seasonal, that's going to be turned into a full-time residence? Is that housing development? And so if that's housing development, what if at the same time the court has a commercial application that's going to provide Chittenden County, for instance, with 200 jobs? Is the court now supposed to prioritize it and say, well, no, we have this legislative enactment saying that we have to prioritize housing development. So the single family dwelling takes precedence over the commercial multi-job matter. What if it's 5 units in a multifamily, but it's 300 jobs? My point is that courts have to prioritize things as a matter of course, and putting something in that says we have to prioritize a certain category of cases without defining it or giving criteria, I suggest can lead to situations where someone's always going to be upset, people are going to disagree, and the court has no guidance as to what really is intended. As I said before, we understand the importance of housing, and I want to be very clear about this. We understand in the judiciary, the environmental judges understand that housing underpins so many other of our dockets. The criminal docket for individuals from the Department of Corrections, the juvenile docket for parents getting custody of their children, landlord-tenant matters in the civil docket. The court does move the cases. In 2024, there were 18 municipal housing appeals. 11 of them have been completed and were completed within 100. The average disposition time was 138 days. There are currently 7 of those remaining, and each of those 7 was filed between October 16th and December 19th. I would also note that in 2024, there were no appeals of issued permits where the municipality had issued them had resulted in the environmental court overturning those permits. So putting language in that tells the court that certain things need to be prioritized, I would suggest is unnecessary and can lead to unexpected consequences given the lack of clear guidance.
Oh, any thoughts, any responses to?
We don't have to resolve this today, right?
We do not.
So, I mean, I completely agree with Judge Zone. I don't think there's enough experience in House General to have gotten this right now. And I think we need to do a lot of work on it. And I don't think we're going to resolve it today. We're not trying to return to the budget conversation.
Not in this meeting. We are.
So Judge,
we are today though.
Judge Zoni, on the first points you made on page 19 on the de novo hearing, I just wonder, I take your concern that if the courts are being asked to assess compatibility with all municipal bylaws, admittedly, I don't understand the court process well enough. Do you see a way to make this more narrow for this appeals to only consider municipal bylaws in question from the earlier one? Is there language you would propose, or would you just think it's just too messy to consider all that we can't segregate out just the bylaws that might have been germane to the original hearing or the original court case that can't be split from during this de novo appeals process?
I suspect language could be put in, but the question is whether it needs to be, and I could work on some language that could possibly address that question. Yes.
Like your fundamental question is this even necessary?
And
right.
I would ask a different question, which is, do we think we're accomplishing something when we could be making things worse?
You mean in this language?
Yes.
Got the, yeah.
I do not see this language as adding anything. And since it doesn't add anything, one view is, well, it doesn't add anything. It basically says what we already do, so it doesn't cause any harm. I understand that, but again, when we have statutory rules of construction that say there's a reason something's put in, and attorneys will look at this and try to find something potentially to say, here's what the legislature meant. And then it starts taking us down a road that unless there are issues that the legislature or others have identified that need this language, you may not want to put it in.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. And Tom, where else would this set a precedent for prioritization, or have we prioritize the court address things in other areas?
I can't think of anything where the court was told to prioritize. I know that in several bills over the past year or two, this type of idea has come up and it has not made its way into the bill.
Right.
I note that just above that is language that came in last year about the 90 days for the goal. And that language had gone back and forth and round, but that I can tell you I was comfortable with in the end, because we already have a chief superior judge policy that says decisions have to be issued within 90 days. So it was really stating what is absolutely consistent. And our environmental division generally gets those decisions done well in advance of 90 days. So that was okay as a goal.
Which is great. Yes, we're underscoring the importance of 90 days. Thank you. And if there are no other questions, we have a couple other witnesses on this.
Can I just hit one other thing quickly?
Sure.
I would be remiss if I didn't mention that when you go to the aggrieved person standard, and I know you're not going to be resolving this today, but I just wanted to highlight that it's unclear what the intent is. If the intent of the legislature is to expand standing to be able to appeal, this language would accomplish that.
Yep.
If the intent of the legislature is to restrict standing, this language does not accomplish that.
Huge, Judge.
Right.
And I could go on a lot longer on that if you'd like, but I just think that it expands who can appeal. It makes it potentially, instead of having it related to people who are currently the ones who are interested persons, by demonstrating an interest, they have to show that it's in the immediate neighborhood, and they have to show physical or environmental impact. This, as Ledge Counsel said, allows a person aggrieved who alleges an injury to a particularized interest. It doesn't restrict it, as the current language does, to the physical or environmental impact. Does it mean emotional? Does it mean financial? These are the types of things that would be raised and courts would have to consider. And keep in mind, the language that you currently have has been here for decades, and there's a lot of case law on that. And so we would be developing new case law on the new standards, how they apply to the environmental municipal permits and such.
Thank you. Thomas has questions.
Thank you for bringing that up, Judge Zone. So I would ask you, if we look at the language that is currently being struck in H 479 on page 21, the person owning or occupying property in the immediate neighborhood and so on. My concern with that language is I don't see it, I'm not a lawyer though, where it requires somebody to be aggrieved. It really qualifies them to appeal by just the fact that they live in close proximity to something. That's the first half of my question is that true, or do you feel like they do need to demonstrate being aggrieved in order to be a legitimate appellant, or whatever the right term is? And then if the other part of this is, should we just leave that language and further add this aggrieved classification so that only people that can truly demonstrate that they have been aggrieved, that fall within this close proximity to the existing statute, would that be better narrowing the pool of individuals that can legitimately slow down these housing projects?
Judge Walsh actually addressed that type of question in a case that I could send to the chair and to the committee. The short answer is it's not just owning and occupying. You still have to show what's called constitutional standing. You still have to establish the injury. And so if I can send, I know you're short on time, I can send a copy of that decision to the committee and you can take a look at it. It actually had to do with subsection 4, line 14. And what Judge Walsh concluded was that each of the 20 people had to show the potential for the actual injury. So I'll send that along if that would be helpful, and then I could address any further follow-up if you'd like.
Maybe it would be clarifying if we left that language, did strike it, and just further added the aggrieved aspect to it, which would then maybe apply to all the, in clear statute language, that you have, all 20 people need to be aggrieved.
Well,
But
I think that
no
goes, the question is, would it additionally restrict? Because I think the objective is to not expand, but to restrict the number of appeals.
Yeah.
It would have, if you, right now, subsection 3, lines 8 through 13 that would be struck, have that two-part test, if you will, immediate neighborhood and the physical or environmental impact. Person aggrieved does not have that. If you kept this, you still have that for one category. Person aggrieved is a broader category.
Right.
So if you added person aggrieved, it would expand upon number 3. Because basically it would be that they don't have to live in the neighborhood. They can live on the other side of town theoretically.
I'm just not reading it that way. When I look at line 20 and 21 on page 20, it just says any one of the following. So, but I'm not a lawyer and I'm trying to understand this. So thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you. And we may come back to this. I should. Yeah, we will be definitely coming back to it. Thank you. Josh and Sam, I think you are up next. Oh no, Charlie Baker, but I don't. Charlie, are you here? Great, Charlie, welcome. And then Josh and Sam.
Good morning, and yeah, thank you. For the record, Charlie Baker on behalf of the Vermont Association of Planning and Development Agencies, the state's RPCs, Regional Planning Commissions. We are not lawyers, and but we are interested in this appeals issue. And I know we sent in a letter last week with more comments on this bill, but I know you want to focus just on this appeal section right now. So I think I'll just kind of say that we would support any language that would restrict kind of just the nuisance litigation that we've been seeing in some occasions where adjacent property owners are just filing suits to delay, to defeat adjacent housing development, and particularly affordable housing development. And we know it doesn't happen a lot, but it is certainly a real challenge to affordable housing production when it happens. Certainly, I don't know enough to disagree with anything the judge just said, but would support his suggestions to we are trying to narrow this, is my understanding. So I think this is heading in the right direction, and maybe with a little bit of wordsmithing here, we can get there in the session. The other thing I just want to note, just because there's something I've been hearing a little bit, is that the appeal study being done by the Land Use Review Board is only, and it's in section 12 of this bill, is only focused on Act 250 appeals. So that is, we're not going to get anything back from the Land Use Review Board addressing municipal appeals. So I think that addressing it in some way to narrow who can file appeals would be worthwhile. So I think
thank you, much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie. And thank you for your letter. Great. Josh and Sam, you want to come up either as a twosome or however you want to do it?
We're not prepared.
You seem to be.
Especially today.
Unplanned.
Yeah. But yeah.
You've decided to embrace spring.
Yeah, it came yesterday. It means it's just.
We're exactly one.
So while Samantha's pulling up our few brief slides, Josh Hanford, Director of Intergovernmental Relations at the Vermont League of Cities and Towns.
Samantha Sheehan, Municipal Policy and Advocacy Specialist, also at the League of Cities and Towns.
And we just have a few brief things to share with you. Municipal zoning appeals. VLTP supports efforts to enable the development of housing that municipalities have envisioned or planned for, they've allowed in their zoning. And to that end, we support the provisions in this bill attempting to do that. Whether they do whether they're stated with the right language or not seems to be the debate of today and of yesterday and of last week. We have talked to some lawyers that say this in fact does reduce the number of people that could appeal. Others that are saying just the opposite. So this really needs to be resolved because our goal is to reduce the number of people that would appeal these permits without proper, interest, standing, injury, whatever the right legal terms are. And this seems to be a debate that we can get to the bottom of with the right people drafting the language that does in fact that. So that's all I'll say on this. You can see our bullets on the slides, but we
Can I?
yeah.
So I think on the sections just discussed by the judge and by Charlie, it is important to take them separately. So certainly based off of feedback we've heard, including from the MAC attorneys, the injury to a particularized interest could be refined. But the elimination of the right to appeal by petition, or the so-called neighbor clause, is, I think, on firmer ground, more directly addresses the goal of restricting nuisance appeals or appeals made by parties who may not be feeling who the use of their own property is maybe not in jeopardy by a planned development.
Can I just say?
Yeah, sure.
I mean, we have someone in the witness here who I tend to trust more than I trust myself on housing policy, which is Josh. I mean, Samantha, you're great too, but we've been having this conversation for years. What I worry about in terms of having this particular conversation in a vacuum is that I believe the best way to limit appeals is to exempt areas and units from appeals to create more by right opportunities to develop needed housing and other important projects where land use is no longer a question. It is hard for me to look at this trying to solve a problem that is better solved through provisions that I have in another bill and through some of the work we can build on that we did in the last 2 years. I don't think wordsmithing this is going to be the best use of our time. And I probably won't be in the room for that if that's what we expect to do.
Certainly housing by right would be a more direct route. Absolutely. Yeah.
Right, and we have yet to have that fuller conversation on our manufactured housing by right because we didn't.
If I could say something,
Yes,
I definitely support taking up that bill that's now over in SNRE to really get to the heart of this. That's why it has to be on that committee. But what I also would say is I see merit in continuing this. So I'm sorry you see this as a moot, but from what I understand so far is I do see an opportunity to make this language further narrow.
To me, if there are new people in the house to this conversation, there are new people in this room to the conversation, to do this in a vacuum is not going to work. This is one tiny slice of something that we've talked about. And I think people should take extremely seriously what Judge Zone just said, which is this would open so much of what we've done back up to reinterpretation before we're done with it.
Correct.
The changing decades of precedent because we think this sounds good is so dangerous. I don't plan on being in the room for that.
Share that concern, but this is a new committee for me.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, just the other, the pieces of the bill that talk about de novo, if it helps, we're supportive of it, as long as it doesn't require municipalities to have on the record hearings if they don't have the capacity to do that. The other section of the bill that allows, municipal zoning sort of preemptions to date allows municipalities to adopt zoning preemptions without a hearing. We do support that. We've done some surveying and most municipalities are trying to comply with the recent local zoning sort of preemptions in place. Some are not there yet. And the reasons they're not there are, other priorities, lack of technical assistance, lack of funding. And to the extent that we can speed the process up, And the municipality can adopt those because they're required without having some of this process that slows it down that they can't control anyways, the outcome. We support this effort to move those along quicker.
Takes us back to some of our rights.
Yeah. And so that the goal we're fully behind. There is obviously challenges of whether this language is the right place to do it or other ways to get there. That's really the extent of what we wanted to tell you.
But the important to us on section 11 is that there be an option for the legislative body to adopt the zoning change without a hearing, not a requirement, because in some cases, there may be greater benefit to opening up a public process and, you know, if the state were to pass a future new preemption on designated areas, maybe the municipality wants to also look at other high density residential districts and maybe explore adopting the same change there. So it should be a choice.
Right.
Yeah.
What came up in committee was also giving petitioners or community members the option to maybe force a public hearing. Do you have any thoughts about that? So the town does it, but
Well, I'm just trying to think in my mind if they have that ability already.
force a public hearing.
Um,
The town could synchronize the bylaws with the state rules without public hearings, but if X number of residents say, you know what, we really want a public hearing. That's what came up as a way to mitigate the concern that this might just go through without enough.
I mean, they can call a public question a non-binding resolution and a public question by petition. And push a special
Is that 5% of the
meeting.
electorate?
I
This might
think
be,
so.
this would be lower. It will be-
Yeah,
We might already have that ability.
yeah, I have
that we
to
could
double
check.
check that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that may exist. Historically, the legislature's done very well at protecting constituents' ability to call a question. So we can see if that maybe exists already in Title 34.
So in summary and in conclusion,
We support the goals
love the
here.
bill.
We love the bill overall.
Yeah.
This zoning appeal section, clearly you have a decision to make whether you try to go for better language that does what everyone is hoping this will do, or you take a different approach. We support the effort to reduce these appeals for municipal zoning that has approved these projects and wants them to be put in place and wants to have this housing available to the residents.
right,
We could have spoken to any section of the bill. We enjoyed
we will,
working with the House and are happy to support it as.
but on the whole, you support all the work that's in H 479.
Yep, brownfields, love it.
With the hope that we maybe refine this language. And if you had recommendations on how to refine it, we would appreciate hearing it.
Okay. I guess while we have the chair and in case we don't come back to talk about this bill, theme of our testimony in the other chamber was to prioritize infrastructure that we see.
That helps us with our conversation about the
Yeah.
money pieces.
We support the many other provisions and certainly support the appropriations carried by this bill. They're very popular programs that municipalities have benefited from across the state, but we see a foundational priority as the public infrastructure.
So I'm going to just press you on this for 2 minutes before
Great.
we have to break for lunch.
Cool.
That means you would prioritize the bond bank
The
infrastructure,
revolving loan fund.
the brownfields, the MTAG, the municipal
MTAG.
technical assistance grants,
Correct.
and what else do you
CHIP.
see as infrastructure? Well,
And
CHIP
CHIP.
isn't a
Not
money.
in this
Yeah.
bill, but yeah.
But
No, but it's not a money issue. It's not
Yeah.
an ask we have to make.
So I'll rapid fire off a couple points about that. So one is that MTAP supports the brownfield deployment. Many of the successful and to date completed MTAP supported projects relate to brownfields.
Yes.
Many also, there's more than 7 villages that received MTAP or sewer expansion. Both MTAP and the revolving loan fund draw down greater investment. So those are both small dollar investments as a proportion of state budget that capture substantially greater funds from federal and philanthropic.
That's true for the downtown tax credits. That's true for VHCB.
Sure.
That's true for pretty much all our programs that work with tax credits to leverage greater investment.
And almost definitely with the revolving loan fund program for
You're talking about
infrastructure.
the bond.
The bond bank, yeah.
Because we have a couple revolving loan funds in here.
Yeah. That will definitely add tax capacity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, as we grow our grand list.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we're like, that to us is a really big thing for the buck.
Great. That is very helpful. I think that is helpful. I think we're going to thank you and we're going to go to caucus and Ellen.
So can I just add one
Yeah.
small clarification? I agree with Judge Zone largely on everything he said. However, I do just want to clarify that Judge Zone was referencing subsection 3 of the interested person standard. Subsection 4 is the any 20 persons.
Yeah.
So that is a much broader category that does not require an injury.
Yeah.
Whether or not the immediate neighborhood would expand or contract the ability to appeal, I do think is open for debate, but the subsection 4, any 20 persons who do not have an injury, that is changing significantly. And I wish Senator Romney still was here because I would explain it further, but
That's the point that's the point I tried to make that Ellen should
That's why I support.
Yeah.
I do too.
Yeah.
I do too.
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
there's
You know
two
what?
different things that should.
Two different things
Yeah.
happening.
Let's
Yeah.
continue. Let's
Yes.
continue this. This is a
Yes.
big discussion.
Yeah.
This is one of the big differences and one of the big things we have to continue.
You sort of summarized it with our MAC attorneys and others. It's like, this may be not the full enchilada that we need, but this is moving us in the right direction.
In the right direction.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Thank
Let
you.
us continue this conversation. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
We'll see you tomorrow.
Okay.